We've been talking about some pretty hot topics on this channel. Please keep in mind that we are silly people, we are new here, and these are just our personal opinions.
We value a free and open search for meaning. As such, a lot of this conversation is us thinking things through. Try to remember that when you're commenting. Be kind to each other and to yourselves, and to us if you can.
Gonna start a war, guys.
Please don't. I don't want to do it.
I'm so tired.
If it was due to infiltration, then that infiltration would be setting our side up as the enemies. Mm-hmm. Like, we're the bad guy. Like, we're already being the bad guy because of the ideological divide in the country. Like, we're, for a lot of people who consider themselves true American patriots, we're like the enemy. For sure. And then we're like taking a firmer and more official stance on that. You know?
Yeah. And I just think we could all maybe just have like a yard sale together as a community. And then we let you have your wacky beliefs and you let us have our wacky beliefs. And that is... nobody tries to kill each other, okay?
That would be nice.
It's like how at some high schools you're the Lions and at some high schools you're the Bears. But all of you have to go to high school. So just chill out, okay? Sounds of the ambience. Next, we're going to listen to a clip from Behind the Bastards episode, How the Rich Ate Christianity. There's explicit language in this.
Like, and Nicole Ashoff writes in her book, quote, "Capital's ability to periodically present a new set of legitimating principles that facilitate the willing participation of society accounts for its remarkable longevity despite periodic bouts of deep crisis." Following Max Weber, one of the foremost social thinkers of the 20th century, this belief system, which justifies and legitimates capitalism and the primacy of profit making, is the spirit of capitalism. So that's like the term that some of these thinkers use, the spirit of capitalism, for the ways in which our justifications for it change over time. And the argument here is that kind of FDR was putting a new set of principles to legitimate capitalism. So capitalism is legitimate because we also have this social safety net and we'll take care of people. And it's not this soulless system that we had in the decades prior. We've changed it, and so it can keep going, right? And the fact that capitalism is this syncretic is seen by critics of capitalism as part of why it's so hard to fucking kill.
It's kind of like, I'll change.
Yeah.
It'll be different.
Baby, I can
this
change.
time.
Yeah.
Take me back. Take me back. Come on.
So that's
what I hear.
That is what actual socialists are saying at the time, but that's not what capitalists see. So like the capitalists who are opposed to FDR see him as the literal embodiment of Lenin coming to burn their mansions and molest their expensive pets, right? Like that they don't see this as like, oh, he's keeping the system that makes us all rich alive. They see this as he's coming to tear it all down. People aren't dying in the streets as much.
Actually, I brought a letter from this time period because I wanted to join in. And this was written by a millionaire at, I think it was 1934. It just went, ah!
Editor here, he literally screams for like 9 seconds right here. So I muted it.
Oh, you got to stop this.
Yeah,
that was the last.
Yeah, that is an adequate summary of what these people are saying at the time. And a number of these dudes, titans of industry, guys who own companies like General Motors, form an organization called the National Association of Manufacturers in 1895.
I know them.
Yeah. Oh, you know NAM?
The Candy Man was hanging out with
yes,
them.
he was.
Yeah,
Welch.
he sure did. He sure did.
Yeah.
Welch, one of the founders of the John Birch Society. Yeah. Now, the NAM had been right in the thick of those Gilded Age recessions we talked about earlier. Like, that's why this comes out in 1895. There's all these collapses, and the left is rising. You know, you have these huge armed strikes and like militant workers organizing, and these people are like, well, if they're organizing with guns stop people from bringing scabs in, couldn't they organize with guns to take our stuff? You know,
that is one of the things about the organized left. So somewhat is like that obsession with policing each other, of being like, no, this is how we protest. We only do it this way. And then if you go back in history, and it's like, they broke windows and threw grenades into places. They lit everything on fire.
Yeah, there was not a lot of discussion about, like, well, now you're making it violent. There was this discussion of, like, how do we build the best grenades to throw at our bosses?
Right, exactly.
They had nitpicking arguments about how many nails should go through the back.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a different time, and so these businessmen get very scared of this different time, and they create the NAM as a way to kind of like organize and develop a strategy to protect themselves. So Roosevelt comes to power, and initially they have a bunch of different things that they're scared about. They're also really worried about like domestic industry getting flooded by foreign imports and stuff. But when Roosevelt comes to power, and they actually see this big socialist legislation get passed, they start flipping out and thinking like, also the thing that's happening in this period is the USSR has just formed. So they're both seeing, okay, we had these armed workers in the streets. They're getting more organized. They're in the halls of power in Washington, and they're going to do what the USSR did. And soon we'll all be, executed, and our stuff will be taken from us. So NAM pivots to opposing the New Deal. Their primary contention was that FDR sought to provide people with a sense of security and a safety net, and this was a bad idea. This is literally what they're writing at the time. Giving people a safety net is a bad idea, because if people aren't scared of dying in the street, they won't work as hard, and the free market system will fail.
I mean, this is absolutely true. I've seen a lot of trapeze acts, and they work harder when there is not a net.
Yeah, they do.
There's a lot of lazy trapeze artists.
Right.
Walmart will have fewer employees if no one is going to starve to death if they don't work there.
Defending the oppressed, and then like trying to be the leader of the I don't know. I'm like, wait, what is y'all's goal? What? I think y'all didn't mean it. I think you're just using things to save as a front for what you're actually trying to do, which is something else. Gain power to start a war with the other side, maybe? Hopefully not. Next, let's travel back in time. History may not repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. This is a book from 1922 from a man who lived in England and wrote a lot, G.K. Chesterton. This book is called Eugenics and Other Evils.
There is one idea of this kind that runs through most popular tales, those, for instance, on which Shakespeare is so often based, an idea that is profoundly moral, even if the tales are immoral. It is what may be called a flaw in the deed, the idea that if I take my advantage to the full, I shall hear of something to my disadvantage. Thus Midas fell into a fallacy about the currency, and soon had a reason to become something more than a bimetallist. Thus Macbeth had a fancy about forestry. He could not see the trees for the wood. He forgot that, though a place cannot be moved, the trees that grow on it can. Thus Shylock had a fallacy of physiology. He forgot that if you break into the house of life, you find it a bloody house in the most emphatic sense. But the modern capitalist did not read fairy tales, and never looked for the little omens at the turnings of the road. He, or the most intelligent section of him, had by now realized his position, and knew in his heart it was a false position. He thought a margin of men out of work was good for his business. He could no longer really think it was good for his country. He could no longer be the old hard-headed man who simply did not understand things. He could only be the hard-hearted man who faced them. But he still marched on. He was sure he had made no mistake. However, he had made a mistake, as definite as a mistake in multiplication. It may be summarized thus, that the same inequality and insecurity that makes cheap labour may make bad labour, and at last no labour at all. It was as if a man who wanted something from an enemy should at last reduce the enemy to come knocking at his door in the despair of winter, should keep him waiting in the snow to sharpen the bargain, and then come out to find the man dead upon the doorway. He had discovered the divine boomerang. His sin had found him out. The experiment of individualism, the keeping of the worker half in and half out of work, was far too ingenious not to contain a flaw. It was too delicate a balance to work entirely within the strength of the starved and the vigilance of the benighted. It was too desperate a course to rely wholly on desperation. And as time went on, the terrible truth slowly declared itself. The degraded class was really degenerating. It was right and proper enough to use a man as a tool, but the tool, ceaselessly used, was being used up. It was quite reasonable and respectable, of course, to fling a man away like a tool, but when it was flung away in the rain, the tool rusted. But the comparison to a tool was insufficient for an awful reason that had already begun to dawn upon the master's mind. If you pick up a hammer, you do not find a whole family of nails clinging to it. If you fling away a chisel by the roadside, it does not litter and leave a lot of little chisels. But the meanest of the tools, man, had still this strange privilege which God had given him, doubtless by mistake. Despite all improvements in machinery, the most important part of the machinery, the fittings technically described in the trade as hands, were apparently growing worse. The firm was not only encumbered with one useless servant, but he immediately turned himself into 5 useless servants. The poor should not be emancipated, the old reactionaries used to say, until they are fit for freedom. But if this downrush went on, it looked as if the poor would not stand high enough to be fit for slavery. So at least it seemed, doubtless in a great degree subconsciously, to the man who had wagered all his wealth on the usefulness of the poor to the rich and the dependence of the rich on the poor. The time came at last when the rather reckless breeding in the abyss below ceased to be a supply and began to be something like a wastage, ceased to be something like keeping foxhounds and began alarmingly to resemble a necessity of shooting foxes.